Blog Talk Radio.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Never Needs Live. The opening song was titled Something's Got a Hold on Me, and it was sung by the People's Temple Choir. The song leads us into our guest appearance tonight. Laura Johnston Kohl was a member of People's Temple, and she moved to Jonestown along with many other members of People's Temple congregation. On November 18th, 1978, 913 people of this group died in Jonestown, Guyana, after leader Jim Jones gave orders to commit suicide. Armed guards surrounded the pavilion and gave them no choice but to die, either by drinking a cyanide-laced flavor aid drink or by being held down and injected for those who fought the idea. 5 more people had died at the airstrip, and a few were seriously wounded. A United States Congressman, Leo Ryan, was shot and killed by a group of people Jones ordered to stop the plane from leaving. Laura was in Georgetown when the orders came through that they too must commit suicide. Thankfully, Laura and others survived this horrific event. Laura is a Jonestown survivor and author of Jonestown Survivor, An Insider's Look. But first of all, I would like to say welcome to Laura, and thank you so much for joining the show tonight.
Thank you very much, Vicki. It's a pleasure being here.
Before we get started on the discussion about your book, I'd like to let the listeners know that you can phone into the studio during the show and ask any questions. The number to phone in on is 602-753-1644, or you can join the live chat to post questions for Laura. So, Laura, I thought you could start us off here by describing your experiences that led you up to your membership in People's Temple.
I grew up in Washington, D.C. in the 60s. I was actually born in 1947, but when I started being aware of politics, it was in about 1955 and later, and I was very much involved in politics in Washington, and in a way that opened my eyes and prepared me to try and figure out a way to make the world better. I started out as working with the Democrats and supporting John Kennedy and Martin Luther King and all the different civil rights groups that were making efforts then. And then over that decade of the 1960s, I saw the leaders that I had respected and worked for and admired for many years all shot down or killed. I mean, I saw John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Medgar Evers and so many more civil rights leaders and human rights leaders just shot down. It really made me determined to find a way to make a difference in the world.
Good for you. So what made you decide to join People's Temple? What led you there and what made you decide to actually join with this group?
When I was a college student and after all my heroes had been killed and then we got into the war in Vietnam, I tried to be kind of a one-person voice to try and stop the inhumanity. I joined the Black Panthers for a period. I went to Woodstock for a period and tried free love and everything that went with that. And I tried different ways to have some kind of impact on my environment. And I pretty soon found out that it was not a one-person job and that you needed a very strong voice with an organization that could actually implement some of your voices, some of the thoughts you had. And so I looked for an organization that would meet my needs and be, heroic and trying to fight all these injustices. And right when I was at that crossroad, that's when I kind of stumbled into People's Temple. I met Jim Jones for the first time in March of 1970 in California.
So can you tell listeners what types of programs that People's Temple had in place to help out the community? I've heard of quite a few.
Yes, I worked by day at the welfare department, so and many of us had jobs in the community and in different kinds of human service. So on the weekends when we met with members of the congregation, we could give them advice about how to appeal welfare department or Social Security or disability rulings. We gave them legal advice. We had a free soup kitchen. We had people move into communal living so that they could share resources so that they'd be able to have good lifestyles. We took in many, many, many children and grandchildren. A lot of the kids who were in People's Temple had parents who were either incarcerated or not part of their lives, and we made sure that those kids were placed in homes where people could love them and nurture them. So we provided housing and safe environments for a lot of these kids off the street. So many grandparents who were raising grandkids really looked to us for a way to keep their kids safe. So we worked a lot with children, had a lot of children's programs. We did all kinds of things on the street. We included many very diverse groups in San Francisco, and we welcomed them. We were part of the black Muslims who are our neighbors. We invited some of the gay churches and different churches in San Francisco to be part of us or at least be friends with us, and we would hook up with them when it was time to rally around issues that came up. So we were a very inclusive group, and even though we preached the Bible, we never let Bible beliefs or different things that you might look for in the Bible, we never let things divide us. We figured that we had much more in common being humans and living as part of the human race. So we really wanted to include everybody. And so it was just a whole different point of view that than people were receiving on the street as they moved through their lives.
Sure. So you actually preached. I mean, that's very rare
That's right.
in churches. That's pretty amazing. I could see why so many joined. Speaking with other survivors, I've heard the group was a church, and more often I've heard it was a political movement under the guise of a church, that a lot of church gatherings were more for show and to get people to join, and, it was a way for Jones not to pay taxes on the whole group. What's your perspective on what People's Temple actually was? Was it a bit of both, or...
It's really an interesting question, because I thought that it was a church, and for a long time I considered it a church. I mean, Jim was an ordained minister of the Disciples of Christ, and so he had all the training to, be a minister and follow some sort of regulations within that discipline. But as I look back on it, I don't know even if he believed in God or if he was an atheist or really didn't care one way or the other, because I think that he was introduced to churches early on in his life and found that it was an area where you could accumulate a lot of power. And so I think early on he was drawn to the power that a preacher had from a pulpit. And so more and more the power just got him caught up. And so even though, he often quoted the Bible, and he said, I'm all things to all people, he would talk about religion in every service. But he also talked about politics, and he talked about socialism. And I really do think that his plan was to get people to come in, and then he would turn them into activists. And that his whole plan was to get people active, not Christian, not, believers in a religion or anything. He really wanted us to be social activists.
Okay. Yeah, I've noticed that, hearing stories is kind of both ways. So it was kind of confusing. I've heard several say, I think it was under the guise of a church. And so it's just kind of that unanswered question, which in this story, God knows there's so many unanswered questions. But so thanks to the Freedom of Information Act and the hard work and dedication of Rebecca Moore and Fielding McGee, the husband-wife team who are in charge of the website known as Alternative Considerations of Jonestown, we're finding out that Jones had the deaths planned far in advance. Jones held what people called suicide rehearsals. So were you ever actually included in any of these rehearsals, and did you ever fear the day that it would come when it would actually go beyond this rehearsal?
I was at what the media has called a rehearsal in San Francisco in about 1974, I think, and the members of the Planning Commission, a group of about 100 people who were part of different parts of the church who just were basically hard workers or people who needed to be manipulated or people who were easily manipulated. It really was made up of a lot of different people. This group, the Planning Commission, was there, and at one point Jim served punch, and after everybody drank it, he said it was poison, and he set some people up in the audience to pretend that they had, that they were dying or that they died, and they'd fall off chairs. I have to admit that I never took it seriously. It never seemed, I never thought that it would ever happen, and I never thought that it was even a serious attempt. I did think that Jim was in a position of having the same people come to meetings on Friday nights and Saturday nights and Sunday nights and Wednesday nights, and one of his most really amazing qualities was that he created a different environment every time, so you really felt like you missed something if you didn't go. And the other way of looking at that is that he was a thespian. And so he was